The sound was not the roar of battle, but the rhythmic, nauseating slap hiss of the English Channel assaulting the steel hull of the Higgins boat. It was a wet, violent percussion that vibrated through the plywood deck and traveled straight up. The polished hickory shaft of the cane gripped in Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr.'s right hand. At 56, Teddy asked the men whispered, though never to his face, felt every vibration as a dull ache in a knee that had surrendered to arthritis years ago. His normal was this, a relentless, grinding physical pain masked by a rigid, almost theatrical projection of calm. He stood near the ramp, his face wet with salt spray and the icy drizzle of a dawn that refused to break. He was the oldest man in the first wave, the oldest man on the water, and likely the only man with a bad heart condition hidden beneath a woolen uniform shirt. Around him, the men of the 4th Infantry Division, the Ivy Division, were huddled, in misery. They were boys, mostly. Green seasick. They vomited into the bilge water, their faces the color of raw dough. Clutching M1 Garands wrapped in pliafilm like precious, suffocating infants. The air smelled of diesel exhaust, unwashed bodies, and the deep, brine-soaked rot of the sea. But underneath it all, cutting through the sensory overload, was the smell of waiting. It was a thick, metallic taste on the tongue. The invasion of Normandy had been delayed, paused, and restarted, and now the tension was a coiled spring in the gut of every man on the boat. Teddy adjusted his helmet. It felt heavy, pressing on the temples. He looked at the coxswain, a kid from Jersey with knuckles white on the wheel, trying to peer through the slit in the armor plating. The sea was a chaotic mess of gray swells and whitecaps churning under a sky that looked like bruised iron. 2 minutes, General, coxswain shouted, his voice cracking over the roar of the engine. Can't see the landmarks. Smoke is too thick. Teddy nodded, tapping his cane once on the deck. Just put us on the sand, son. We'll handle the rest. He looked back at the men. They were staring at him. They weren't looking at the horizon or the terrifying line of smoke that marked the Atlantic Wall. They were looking at the old man with the cane. They were looking for fear. The son of the Rough Rider, the son of a president, was afraid. Then they were allowed to be terrified. If he was calm, they had to be brave. It was a transaction of leadership, unspoken but absolute. Teddy forced a smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He began to recite a line of poetry in his head, a habit from his father, a way to drown out the noise of the machinery of survival. The ramparts of the world are broken, ... The boat lurched violently, dropping into a trough. A destroyer Shella, massive 14-inch round from the USS Nevada, screamed overhead, sounding like a freight train derailing in the sky. The impact on the beach miles ahead was a dull crump that barely registered over the engine. Port side. Look out, someone screamed. A geyser of water erupted 50 yards to their left, followed by the sharp crack of a German 88mm shell. The water sprayed over them, freezing and heavy. They're waking up, a sergeant yelled. Heads down. Teddy didn't duck. He couldn't. His back wouldn't allow it, and his legend wouldn't permit it. He leaned on the cane, watching the coastline emerge from the mist. It was a smudge of gray dunes and black smoke. Utah Beach. Sector Tier Green. The objective was precise. Land. Clear the causeways through the flooded hinterlands. Link up with the paratroopers dropped inland. The map in his head was perfect. He knew every bunker, every elevation, every strong point. The boat bottomed out with a grinding screech that tore at the teeth. The ramp slammed down into the surf. Go, go, go. The paralysis of the weight shattered. The men surged forward, not with a war cry, but with the desperate, silent need to get off the floating coffin. Teddy stepped off the ramp into waist-deep water. The cold was a physical blow, seizing his breath. His arthritis flared, a spike of white-hot pain shooting up his leg. He planted the cane in the shifting sand of the seabed and pushed. He moved forward, a slow, deliberate figure amidst the splashing frenzy of the young soldiers. He reached the dry sand. The beach was a moonscape of craters and obstacles, rommels, asparagus, steel girders welded together to gut landing craft. But something was wrong. The fire was coming in, snapping overhead, kicking up spurts of sand. Machine gun fire? Mortar rounds walking up the tide line. But it wasn't the wall of fire they had expected. It was sporadic. Confusion, Teddy limped to a low dune, the only cover available. His radio operator, a corporal named Jackson, tumbled into the sand beside him, fumbling with the heavy -300 Seychelles rupees backpack radio. "Get me Red Leader," Teddy barked, scanning the dunes. "I want a position report." Jackson worked the dials, his hands shaking. "Red Leader, this is Big Stick. Come in. Over." Static. The airwaves were a soup of panicked voices, garbled codes, and the interference of thousands of engines. General Jackson gasped, pressing the handset to his ear. I am getting interference. But I picked up a relay from the control vessel, PC 1261. What do they say? They say, Sector Tier Green, secure. Causeway 3 open, timestamp 6:35. Teddy checked his watch. It was 6:40, secure. Open. He looked at the dunes in front of him. This was the precise, factual disturbance. According to the map in his head, the map he had memorized down to the last. Contour line Causeway 3 should be directly in front of them, marked by a distinctive concrete pillbox and a red-roofed house used as a sighting marker. He looked up. There was no pillbox. There was no red-roofed house. There was only a long, unbroken line of seagrass and a single, ruined windmill about 400 yards to the north. "Jackson," Teddy said, his voice dropping to a calm, conversational tone that terrified the corporal more than the screaming. "Give me the map." He unfolded the waterproof map case. He looked at the terrain. He looked at the windmill. He looked at the sun, which was just trying to burn through the smoke. The radio crackled again. "Big Stick, this is control. Second wave is approaching Tier Green. Confirm marker smoke. Over." The order, the confirmation of the landing zone, was based on a reality that didn't exist. The message that Tier Green was secure was a ghost signal, perhaps meant for a simulation, or a hopeful projection from a commander miles out at sea who couldn't see through the fog. Or worse, it was a confirmation of a landing that happened somewhere else. Teddy stood up. He ignored the snap hiss of a sniper's bullet passing inches from his ear. He walked slowly, painfully up the crest of the dune. He needed to see the hinterland. He reached the top. He saw the flooded fields beyond the beach. But the causeway wasn't there. The road that was supposed to lead inland was missing. Instead, there was a dirt track, barely a cart path, winding through a marsh that wasn't on the Tier Green charts. He turned to Colonel Van Fleet, the regimental commander of the 8th Infantry, who had just crawled up beside him. Van Fleet looked wild-eyed, clutching his carbine. "General, where are the bunkers? Where is the exit?" Van Fleet shouted over the roar of a mortar explosion. Teddy planted his cane in the sand. He looked south. Then he looked north. He realized the truth with a sinking sensation that had nothing to do with the war and everything to do with the fragility of human error. The smoke from the naval bombardment, the strong southeasterly current, the loss of the control vessels in the pre-dawn chaos. "Colonel," Teddy said, pointing with his cane towards the distant windmill. "That windmill. That's the exit for Sector Uncle Red." Van Fleet stared at him, wiping mud from his eyes. "Uncle Red. General, Uncle Red is 2,000 yards south of here. We're at Uncle Red. Then we are a mile off course," Teddy finished. The disturbance was absolute. The entire first wave, 30,000 men, tons of equipment, tanks had landed in the wrong place. They were a mile south of the designated kill zone. The tier green secure message was a lie born of confusion. The control boat likely thought they were in the right place and called it secure because they weren't dying fast enough. The implications were catastrophic. The heavy defenses of Utah Beach, the ones that were supposed to slaughter them, were a mile north, waiting for a wave that wasn't there. Here, the defenses were light, but the causeways, the exits were different. The schedule for the tanks was wrong. The artillery plot was wrong. The paratroopers inland would be waiting for a link-up that would never come from the north. If Teddy followed the original plan, he would have to order the men to march a mile north, horizontally along the beach, directly into the teeth of the heavy German guns that were currently silent, waiting for them. He would have to march them into the slaughter. They had accidentally avoided, but the convoy, the second wave, was coming in behind them. They were aiming for tier green. If they corrected their course, they would land in the kill zone alone, separated from the first wave. If they followed the smoke of the first wave, they would pile up here, in a sector with no exits large enough for the tanks. Chaos. Total, unmitigated logistical collapse. The machinery of survival, the timelines, the maps, the carefully orchestrated ballet of death had fallen apart because of a current and a cloud of smoke. A young captain ran up to them. "General, the men are confused. They don't see the markers, they're bunching up. They're digging in. We're sitting ducks if the mortar. Dial us in." Teddy looked at the men. "Lee, we're huddled behind the seawall.